Roman historian Livy claimed that the Roman Empire conquered the world in self-defense. In a period of time as violent as the ancient world, one could see why he might say that. In the ancient world, you were only as safe as how much land you had between you and your enemies. If you only occupy a single city-state, there isn't much to prevent a foreign power, barbarian army, or ambitious neighbor from killing you and taking everything you have. The best way to avoid this problem was, in the Roman mind, to take as much land as possible and expand their borders so that their biggest threats were far, far away from the city of Rome. The idea being that the city's walls aren't its biggest defenses, nor are its armies. It's the settled and fortified frontiers and subjugated peoples between you and any aggressor that gives the greatest peace of mind. In this video, we'll be talking about how Dungeons & Dragons is a game built on an imperialist ideology. Like the Roman Empire conquering the world in self-defense, the traditional experience of Dungeons & Dragons is embodying the civilizing presence and enforcing that civilizing presence through violence, or the threat of violence. Let's look at a traditional setting in Dungeons & Dragons. You are a party of heroes looking for an adventure in a city-state under manifold threats. This city-state occupies the bones of an advanced empire that fell 1,000 years before. This city knows that its defenses and technology are a mere shadow of the ruins that it now occupies. Just beyond the city's farmland is the unsettled wilderness that's grown horribly dangerous in the intervening years between that fallen empire and the world in which the adventurers now find themselves. The job of an adventurer is obvious. Go out and make these areas safe again. The ethics behind doing so are not complicated, and the rewards are obvious. Some horrible monsters out there killing sheep and farmhands, slaying it allows the farmstead to grow peaceably and will alleviate much suffering. Some goblin tribe is preying on caravans to the east, go out and destroy their camps, exterminating their presence in the area. Now trade can flourish, and the roads are much safer. Some druids are raiding logging operations in the woods, go and slay them to allow industry to spread back into the land. Now the people have more resources for building, more room for expanding, and suddenly the area around the city-state is overall much more peaceful, wealthy, and a safer place to live. That is, until the logging operation disturbs an ancient elven kingdom. These elves see the expansionist city-state as a potential threat to the world and demand that their logging operations cease in the woods. The merchants and nobles growing wealthy from this operation put pressure on the fledgling nation leaders to deny the elves their demands, and cowing to foreign demands has the potential to wound the growing pride of the populace. When the Elven Rangers burn the logging operation, both the populace and the merchants call for war. What's worse is that this empowers a strong minority of leaders within the city-state that were hoping for this outcome, because it represents a chance to remove a threat from their borders and allows their house to gain power and renown in battle. This is the problem empires always face. You have to expand to make the border safe, but expanding means there are always new borders to protect. Imagine you're a shepherd who has a wolf problem, so you build a fence to keep the wolves away from your sheep. It works, so successfully in fact that the sheep have increased in number, so you need to make a new and larger fence around the first. This also works, but you get the same problem of overpopulation, so you build a third fence. The need to constantly build new rings of fences would continue indefinitely until the herd became too large for you to properly manage, causing the whole system of sheep and fences to fall apart. I think realizing what's happening in D&D from a geopolitical and historical sense is important to understanding and interpreting the narratives that the characters in our games are living out. The world of D&D that we play in is not the whole of that world. It occupies a moment in that world's history, between the fall of one empire and the rise of others. Essentially, it's the Dark Ages, but those ages didn't stay dark forever. As world powers grow and develop, the need for adventurers will wane. But that's why we set our games in this moment in time. And this is because an adventurer is a tool of the state. Yes, they work for themselves, wandering the lands like wandering samurai ronin and mercenaries, but don't forget what both ronin and mercenaries did for money. They were sellswords. They sold their swords to local lords for money, and those local lords used those borrowed blades for the purpose of expanding and maintaining their power. To head off the inevitable comments section, I'll take a moment here to couch all I've said thus far with the obvious stipulations. Dungeons & Dragons is a system which can be used to simulate all sorts of stories, with varying degrees of homebrew legwork. What I'm saying here very well may not apply to your setting. However, for what D&D is built and intended to be, which is adventurers fighting monsters, gaining loot and experience, what I'm saying can be nearly ubiquitously applied. I think you would be hard-pressed to find official Dungeons & Dragons material that is exempt from the imperialist assumptions that the game is built upon. To define what makes an imperialist ideology, let's first answer what is an empire. From the Achaemenid Persian Empire, to the Romans, to the Mongols, to the British, to the Americans, empire has taken many forms over recorded history, but the core concepts are always the same. A nation-state that gobbles up territory for monetary and political gain. The most successful empires all follow the same permissive core philosophy as well. Observe whatever religion or philosophy you like as long as you pay your dues to the state, in the form of troops, taxes, and goods. A successful empire only puts down a group of people when they become problematic to the state. For instance, the Romans had no quarrel with most religions, but when the Celtic Druid circles were seen as fomenting rebellions, they were crushed. When the Christians' monotheistic views prevented the emperor from being seen as divine, they were persecuted. That only changed when the Roman Emperor Constantine declared official tolerance for Christianity, after a battle where he believed the Christian God delivered him the victory. Whether Constantine did this in earnest belief or thought that Christianity could be a powerful tool of the state is another matter entirely. Personally, I think it's a little column A, a little column B. Empires can often be seen as a melting pot of the cultures they subsume, offering civilization and citizenship as the carrot, with extreme violence as the stick. Often these empires run into problems where the in-crowd wants the resources and defensive value of the territories they rule, but they don't want to share in the benefits of empire with those backwards natives. It took many wars and political upheavals for Rome to expand citizenship to the Italian allies it shared a peninsula with, as the old powerful families were loath to give up the power they had in their own senate. In fact, when citizenship was finally given to the Italian allies, it was done so in such a way where they had little or no impact on a vote's result. This, predictably, even to the people at the time, resulted in further war and bloodshed. All this may sound pretty familiar to Americans. Hawaii, for instance, was annexed by the United States, but many did not want it to become a state because then a primarily non-white people would have a voice in Congress. Not to mention, of course, that Hawaii didn't get much of a choice in the matter either way. But we see this same sentiment used against the induction of Puerto Rico as a state. Indeed, it's hard to reconcile the United States' history of rising up as a colony of the British due to lack of representation and still hold unrepresented territories like the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and Guam. So we have our idea of empire established. An ever-expanding state with an ethnic inner circle that is eager to take, but loath to share the benefits of its gains, but to its credit provides at least a bare standard of infrastructure, stability, and defense that it calls civilization. The only people who can answer the question of whether or not this was worth it were the people slaughtered to make it happen. Now, let's return to our fantasy city-state that we abandoned on the verge of war with the ancient elven people, and guess how it may have played out based on what we just established about empire. Let's charitably assume that your party of adventurers trends towards both lawful and good. I'd imagine that they would go to try and deal with the elves to reach some sort of agreement that would make peace reign. Now, this is indeed possible. Maybe the leaders of the city don't want to get bogged down in a guerrilla war that would take an abundance of resources. But perhaps their rivals do want that, especially if they have an interest in the suspended logging operation. You will take the party to this forest and they will ingratiate themselves to the elves, perhaps defeating some ancient threat hiding in a dungeon nearby. That's classic D&D diplomacy. Well, now that they're fast friends, the elves are willing to talk, as long as the city is willing to make concessions and respect their borders. Here's the problem. A growing civilization needs elbow room. If one border's closed off, they'll expand in a different direction, perhaps towards the sea to become a mariner power, or into the mountains to see what resources they hide, or into the borders of a different nation-state nearby. The question isn't if they will grow, but where will they grow? Wherever they choose, new conflicts will arise over territory and resources, and the adventurers will need to realize that this is chiefly due to their own actions. There have been two theories behind why things happen in history: the Great Man theory and the Trends and Forces theory. The Great Man theory essentially implies that the world changes whenever certain unique individuals appear and change the world because there's just something so special about them. Some innate charisma or incredible cunning that allows them to do what no one up to that point had ever achieved. The Trends and Forces theory suggests that the change was inevitable. The person themselves were not important, and in fact, if it wasn't them, it would have been somebody else. Alexander the Great was known for his blitzkrieg-like conquering of one of the world's largest empires up to that point in record time. Some people believe that there was something special about this man that made it possible for him to do this. I would point those people instead to look at his father, Philip II of Macedon, whose initial conquests and reformation of the military into the famous Greek phalanx paved the way for his son, as the real reason for his success. It's like those articles about millennials who buy houses at 26 and say they can retire at 40 because of their hard work, but you click the article and find out that they were given this hedge fund and a high-ranking job right out of college by their rich father. I would put forth that any competent leader in possession of the resources and momentum that Alexander the Great had upon his ascension to the throne would have gone in much the same direction he did, irrespective of how great or not great they were as individuals. Do you think Julius Caesar could have done what he did were he not born into one of the oldest, most powerful families in Rome? Looking at history, there wouldn't have been a need for Julius Caesar if Sulla before him, who also took over Rome, didn't cede his dictatorial powers after a few years. That's not to say individuals can't affect the world. Imagine civilization as a boulder on top of a hill. An individual is massively important in pushing the boulder one way or the other. They then can have some influence over the boulder, but once it starts rolling, no individual is going to be able to stop it. That's the kind of effect your players have on the world. They enter into a world that is stagnant, sitting in a rut on top of a hill. But once they kick away the stones holding it in place, there are only minor things that they can do to affect the path it takes. Though I tend to lean more towards the Trends and Forces theory, I think the reality is that there is a bit of truth to both theories. And with such a character-focused game like Dungeons & Dragons, it makes an excellent tool to explore both narratively. However, let's consider that Dungeons & Dragons, though designed for Middle Ages-style fantasy settings, is not exactly aiming to be an accurate simulation of the world we are familiar with. We are getting a snapshot of the world in which we follow a group of heroes on an adventure. When the campaign ends, so too does the steady creep of the world and the consequences of the characters' actions therein. That said, there is a well-regarded sentiment among dungeon masters of a concept known as the living world. The idea behind it is that the characters, though they are our window into the world and the main characters of the story, are not the sole actors upon it. A phrase you'll often hear is, "the world doesn't wait for you," meaning that should the players not engage with certain quests, then they will be resolved without the player's influence as the DM sees fit. This is an attempt to make the player's choices on what to do seem meaningful, and is a prime differentiator between video games like The Elder Scrolls Skyrim and D&D. In that game, the player can accomplish quests at their leisure, because the world does not move on. The game absolutely will wait for you, because time is not tracked in a meaningful way. The decision to make the world a living one is then very impactful. The consequence of that, however, is realizing that the world you are in is modeled on one that has existed before, namely the medieval age of our own planet, and is one that inexorably moves towards conquest. Every quest not completed by the party is not directing the path the boulder moves, and that boulder is heading towards the paths all growing nation-states travel at some point: imperialism. This video is not trying to ask, is imperialism good or bad, but to explain that imperialism is an inevitable and direct consequence to removing the natural and fantastic barriers that a nation-state has to their growth. That means, if you are playing in a standard setting, that your game will have themes of imperialism baked into it. And I think it's important to be very aware of that. Obviously, you won't have the responsibility of a piece of public media like a book, movie, or actual play D&D podcast. But I believe the kinds of games we run establish the sort of space we cultivate in the hobby. What you play spreads beyond just the table because everyone carries with them a bit of the story you tell together. People talk about their games to coworkers, friends, to social media. Having imperialism feature in your game isn't a moral judgment on you as a person either. That would be like saying George Lucas is a bad person because he made Darth Vader, and Darth Vader kills people. No, my goal is to approach this game with a high degree of media literacy, meaning I understand the tropes in play, and can engage with them critically, not just take them at face value. I want to cross-examine the ideas of the great man theory and the trends and forces theory and explore them in ways that are grounded in genuine curiosity and good faith storytelling. I don't want to rehash the same tired ideas that old white men have been propagating as truth for hundreds of years. There's plenty of people already doing that, and I don't want to be one of them. To end this video on a constructive note, here are a few things you can do to ensure your table is approaching the concept of imperialism in your game from a critical perspective. Number 1. Above table talk is essential when you're beginning a game. Establish upfront that the world you're playing in won't be morally black and white, and quest givers won't always have good intentions. This has the side benefit of creating a more complex and rich game world. Number 2. Know the history of the game you're playing. As a game made in the 80s, Dungeons & Dragons is of course going to have parts of it that don't hold up to the modern ethic. The 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons has done a lot to bring the game up to modern ethical standards, but the core thesis of adventurers fighting monsters cannot be changed without losing what the game is. However, it can be critically engaged with to create stories where you and your players as the storytellers understand the themes you're working with. Number 3. Consume media that is critical of a pro-imperialism narrative. This is where you can help me. Obviously, fighting the evil empire is a big trope in media, but I'm interested in stories that delve a little deeper into this concept. If you know of any good fiction works that present a critical narrative on the nature of imperialism, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Finally, number 4. Know real-world history. I think a really good grasp of history is helpful whenever you are engaging with something that is a product of its time. Being aware of the imperialist tradition that an adventurer by their very nature is engaging with is a good start to telling a story that doesn't revel in problematic themes of imperialism, but instead engages with them in a way that asks interesting questions. Dungeons & Dragons can be an excellent tool to explore how things might have played out differently. Wow, okay, that was a long video. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, and share this video with your gaming group. My name is DeHart, and I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you stick around and watch some more. This one was a long time coming. It took a lot of time to write and revise, and I'm sure it still needs a lot of I'm sure it could use a lot of help, but at a certain point, I just got to put something out there and see what you guys think. I want to know what you guys think about this. It's kind of a long form essay, but at a certain point, you just got to throw something out there, and I think it's an important thing. It's something I wanted to talk about. All right, see you next time. Bye.